Hi, this is Sonia from An Enthusiastic Reader. It's that time of year when I would like to tell you my favorite books that I read in 2021. So let's get started. I really enjoyed my time reading the Alexandria Quartet. It is a series of books that are revolving around a set of characters that are all together in Alexandria, Egypt, right before World War II. And so Justine, which is the first novel, is written in the perspective of Darley, who is a teacher. He's come to teach writing and to teach English, I believe, to people in Alexandria. And he gets wrapped up in the lives of these characters that are around him every day. And he ends up falling in love with a married woman named Justine. Justine is a beautiful, kind of mysterious character, and she has an affair with Darley, although he is living with a prostitute named Melissa and with a very famous novelist named Balthazar. So you're getting from his perspective what it's like to be around all of these people, the intersection of religion, of language, of nationality, and of belief system all come together in this very ornate, beautiful, romantic, stunning language. And you could just stop with Justine and not go any further. But then if you read the next book, you see how it totally upends everything you thought you knew about the characters and their motivations in Justine in Balthazar, which is the second novel in the quartet. So every novel is a conversation with the novel that came before it. And there's really nothing like seeing this shifting perspective and seeing all of these characters reveal themselves in different ways. The next group of books I'd like to talk about is The Country Girls, which is a trilogy of novels written by Edna O'Brien that are extremely autobiographical. She basically took everything that happened to her as a child and her young adulthood and put them into these three novels that were very scandalous at the time in Ireland. And she was almost essentially ejected from Ireland because she was so shamed by the Catholic Church because of the way that she had written these novels, which were very frank about sexuality and desire and just trying to figure out where this young girl, Kate, fit into society. And so the first book is all about her girlhood, and the second book is all about her singlehood, and her third book is all about her marriage and how terrible it turns out to be as she's having children and her husband dominates her. He's jealous of her writing career and he's jealous of her success, and so he controls the custody of their sons. And so this was all taken right out of Edna O'Brien's life. The writing in this was just stunning, beautiful, whimsical. I can recall a scene where she is driving and the snow is falling, and it feels like James Joyce talking in The Dead about the way that the snow is falling as she's looking out the window. She has so many great interactions with these crazy characters from her town and then in England when she's meeting men. And it was just everything that you would want in a coming-of-age series of novels. The next book I have chosen to talk about is The Painted Veil by Somerset Maughm. This is a book that revolves around a character named Kitty and her husband Walter. Kitty was very admired when she was single, and many men wanted to marry her, and she was very choosy and not really wanting to get married and kept putting people off that were proposing to her. And then her sister gets engaged, her younger sister, and suddenly Kitty realizes that she may be running out of choices and opportunities to get married. And everything that's getting poured into the wedding of her younger sister, she will no longer get. And so the next person who shows the least bit of interest in her is named Walter, and she grabs him up, they get married, and it's kind of a disaster for them both from that point forward. They are moved to an outpost. He is a researcher working on cures. He is a researcher working on cures for tuberculosis. And so he is going to do research, and she is a flirt. She starts drawing attention from one of Walter's superiors. They have an affair, and When Walter finds out about it, in retaliation, he volunteers them to go live in Hong Kong and work directly with patients who have tuberculosis. And so she basically can't go home, and she can't to her parents. They won't have her back, and she's scandalized. And so off they go to Hong Kong, and she is trying to figure out the culture and trying to figure out where she fits into this marriage and what her life is going to be. And she ends up being a volunteer at an orphanage for children who have disabilities, physical disabilities. And so the nuns teach her how to take care of these children, and other things happen. And by the end of the novel, she is completely transformed. And it was just a lovely transformation to see and to read about. I felt very gratified. Now, there were some downsides to this book because the way that Somerset Maugham writes about the Chinese people is terrible. He calls them names, and I don't know if it's coming from the author about the people or if it's coming from the characters. It doesn't really matter because it's very offensive the way that he talks about, or the way that the Chinese people are talked about. So that gives the book a demerit, but the relationship and just watching the blossoming of this character of Kitty Fane still put the book on my list for favorite reads of the year. Segment 5 has 2 books. It's The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann and The Magician by Colm Toibin. These books were paired. I paired these books together because I wanted to read something by Thomas Mann before I read Colm Toibin's novel of Thomas Mann's life. And I wanted to know what I was getting into and why I wanted to read about this character. And so I read The Magic Mountain. I loved it. It did take me a long time to read. There were some parts in there that kind of slowed me down. But all in all, this young man checks himself into a sanitarium. He goes to visit his cousin. He has some symptoms himself, and he ends up staying much, much longer at this resort spa sanatorium than he ever expected to. He ends up staying much longer than he ever expected to, and he is transformed completely along the way influenced by the people he meets there, and the people he falls in love with, and the people he befriends, and the frenemies that he has, and his whole perspective changes. And it was fantastic. There were 2 chapters near the end. I made a full video about these 2 books, and so if you want to know more about what I thought, I will post a link below. But it was very gratifying. And then I want to talk about the Colm Toibin novel, The Magician. This was another book that I just really was totally engrossed and immersed in. It was very long, but it was a comprehensive look at Thomas Mann's life from when he was still in school as a boy and through to being an old man. Get to see his whole political life change and his political philosophy and his willingness to speak out against the Nazis from World War I. He didn't really want to come out and say how he felt about the war, and he put out a speech. He was very influential, even as a very young man, because people loved his novels. And he hadn't written The Magic Mountain yet. He was writing it, and then he had to put it off. And he didn't finish it until after the war. So anyway, he didn't take a strong stance against what happened in World War I in Germany. But then by the time World War II came around, he had transformed, and he did speak out against the Nazi rise. And they ended up moving to the United States for a while so he could teach. And he had this fantastical family, this wife that was part of a very storied family in Germany, and he loved the family. He kind of mythologized them in a sense and was so glad to be married into that family. He also had his own burgeoning homosexuality that he has closeted, and he writes about in his diaries that Colm Toibin actually took from the diaries. So he had a very secretive inner life, and he had these very flamboyant and outspoken children who were just defying all of the conventional norms that were there at the time. And it was just really interesting. I loved it. I thought it was a very good read. The next book I'd like to talk about is Elizabeth McCracken's book called The Souvenir Museum. This is a book of short stories, and most of the stories take place when the characters are displaced from their homes. Either they're on vacation or they're on their way to meet someone, or they're in transition in some way, and they are kind of out of their comfort zones, outside of their homes. And 5 of the stories revolve around a couple as they meet and as their relationship matures and evolves over many years. So you get to see, and they're interspersed with the other stories, so you get to see them pop up and learn more about each of those characters. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And Elizabeth McCracken is just really good at developing and building a world so that you can understand where the character is feeling insecure in whatever setting they are in. You feel like you know the characters right away. She's just very good at writing them. So I enjoyed it a lot, and I would read it again. The next book I'd like to talk about is Early Morning Riser by Katherine Heiny. And this is it's kind of like, I want to call it a romantic comedy. It's a comedy, but there are also serious parts. There are touching moments that really made me actually cry. It's about a elementary school teacher. She moves to a small town in Michigan. It's like her first or second teaching job. She's very young, and she starts meeting people in the town, making friends, understanding what the town is like with these characters. And then she ends up dating and kind of falling in love with a character who has dated almost every other available woman in the town and has slept with many, many. And he is just very open, and everyone's open and upfront about it, that he is kind of this like Lothario, but he's very good-hearted. He's not mean in any way. He's just very freewheeling. And anyway, Jane, who is the main character, falls in love with him. And then something happens in their lives that turn their whole lives upside down. And she grapples with his ex-wife and his ex-lovers and the thing that happens to her, and trying to make the best of it. And it was just very uplifting. So if you're kind of looking for a book to lift you up a little bit and make you laugh and make you just feel something, this was really good. And I read it over the course of a weekend, and I still think about it. It should be no surprise to anyone who knows what I like to read that 2 books by Elizabeth Strout made the list this year. They were both sequels of books that I actually loved. Olive Kittridge was a book I deeply loved, and My Name is Lucy Barton is definitely one of my top favorite books of all time. And so I read the sequels to those beloved novels of mine, and I ended up really liking both of them quite a bit. Maybe they didn't have quite the magic of the first of the originals, but it doesn't matter. Olive Again, which is the sequel to Olive Kittridge, takes place, not too long after we ended and left her at Olive Kittridge, but you get to see her, dealing with the things that have happened to her in her life since the last time we met her. And with aging is a very big component of the novel, and still told in individual stories, but they all come together as a novel in the end. I mean, there is a chronological progression, and you still meet people in the town, but you see Olive interacting more with everyone, with every character, and I did cry. I'm going to tell you, I cried again at parts of this, just tore my heart out. Elizabeth Strout just has a way of writing about people that evokes such empathy in me, and I think in a lot of people who read her work. And William is kind of in the same vein. Lucy Barton is widowed, and so she has a lot of free time, and so she kind of gets sucked back into her first husband's drama, and he wants to be with her, he wants to be around her. And I don't think you would have necessarily had to read My Name is Lucy Barton to appreciate William, but I think if you did, it would be much more a rich experience to read them back to back, because you really get to know and feel what Lucy's life was like when she was a child, and a lot of that still recurs in O. William. And so a lot of the past comes back to be confronted in the present, and I will definitely be reading both of those books again. Okay, my number one book, and even though I didn't rank the rest of the books, this is definitely my favorite read of the year, and it is Crossroads by Johnathan Franzen. And I know what you're thinking. You're not going to read this book, and that's totally fine. Nobody needs to read it. I did see some criticism about this novel on Twitter the other day. Someone said, Franzen writes a character who does something good and then immediately makes the character do something bad that eliminates what they did that was just good. I can see that as a criticism, and it's valid, but to me, that's the whole point of the book, is that every character in the family that is featured in Crossroads wants to be good. They have been taught to be good. They have an inherent desire to be good people, and yet they do bad things, and they are deeply flawed and hurt each other, but they're striving, and there are reasons why they behave the way they do. And it's a deep dive. It's my jam, this kind of book, where it's, this very microscopic focus on the inner lives of characters to figure out what makes them tick and what makes them come together. And it's just like, what is Franzen trying to tell us about human nature? And I think a lot of us want to be good and still do things that undermine all that effort to be a good person. And then you mix in religion, and you mix in the politics of the time with the Vietnam War. And there are just so many elements to the lives of these characters that are fascinating to me. So I get it if people can't read him because it's Franzen, and that's totally, totally cool. But as long as he's writing the next book, that's all I care about, because all the expectations I had for wanting to read a book that would make me think and make me feel really, and just get immersed in a very long book about 5 people, and it totally met my expectations. So I'd love to know in the comments what your favorite books might have been, if you want to share them, and I have some other videos in mind. I want to do a video about some of my tentative plans for reading in 2022, and kind of a core list TBR that I'd like to go over. And so I will be making another video very soon. And in the meanwhile, I hope things are going well for you. And please know that I appreciate you watching my video. And so Happy New Year, and I will see you soon. Bye.